All right, so this is what we're going to build today. This is sort of the final view of what we're going to build for this week. We're going to start off with, this is actually a table. So you're going to see 4 cells, so a 2x2 table. We're going to use ASP table to build this. And this is going to be cell 1. This will be cell 2, cell 3, and cell 4. Now if I refresh, let's start from the beginning. All right, so this is what we're going to build for this week. So we're going to have a little panel here, and we're going to use ASP panels as well to hide and unhide. We're going to group things together and hide them and unhide them in one grouping. So this first panel will have name, address, email, and phone. And if I hit next, we're going to see little error messages come up. And we'll start off with a name. So Jim Kirk. We'll have the address as, let's say, 123 Enterprise Lane. Email will be jim@kirk. Well, actually, I will make a mistake on the email. Let's hit tab and go to the next one. So it'll say invalid email address. And notice that it's going to overlap where the error message for required was originally. But now if I fix that, so .com, phone number, let's just say ASDF, it'll say invalid phone number, right? So now I have to fix that. And of course, we really should show what sort of format we want with the phone number, but I've left that out for today. But this is the style we're looking for. So with round brackets, so like 222 and then 333 4444, and now it goes away. Now birthday will be disabled, right? I don't want to enter a birthday here. I want to hit next instead. This will unhide a panel that consists of a calendar object and another next button. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add an event handler here. So if I click on July 5th, obviously this is a very strange birthday, but except for a baby maybe or newborn. But you'll see that the date has been populated in the text box. I probably could have used a label instead, but that's semantics for this exercise here. So I could choose different dates, and I will see them populated in that text box. Now if I hit next, we're going to see maybe a little mini shopping list. So like maybe I want some apples and pears. Maybe I'll enter a quantity of like, let's say 4, right? So this actually is another panel with a bunch of grouped items together. So check boxes, text box, label, button. If I hit next, we're going to say enter your PayPal ID. I'm just going to make up a PayPal ID like 12345. Obviously that's not a PayPal ID. And then these last 3 buttons will be for saving data using either a session variable, a cookie, or a query string. And we'll learn all about those shortly. So if I hit pay by session, then I will redirect to a new page where you'll have stuff printed out like Jim Kirk, 123 Enterprise Lane, jim@kirk.com, and so on. If I hit back, let's say I take that information, hit pay by cookie, and we hit next, or hit the pay by cookie button. We're going to have the same information, we're going to retrieve it differently. So the first page, we're going to use something called session variables. Session variables exist only within the session. So once I close the browser, those session variables go away, they're deleted. Cookies, on the other hand, stay until they expire, which is what this page is. We're just retrieving data from cookies in this case. So we'll see that when we get to this point in the exercise. And then finally, query string. So we're going to learn how to retrieve data from our address here, our URL. So we have a question mark, food equals apple, and quantity equals 4. We're going to retrieve that and display that here. So that's the exercise that we're going to focus on this week. So I'm just going to hit back. And our first step is to create a new website in Visual Studio. So I'm going to say File, New Website. All right, we're going to say ASP.NET empty website, give it a home. And so now we have our blank project here, or blank website, with web config. We're actually going to play with web config today because we're going to find that we're going to hit an error pretty soon that will cause us to have to modify our web config file to enable some settings for validation. But the first thing we're going to do is add a page or a web form. So I'm going to right click and say add new item. This new item will be a web form. Now I'm going to leave it as default.aspx and place code in a separate file. And hit add. We'll have our typical HTML here, right? So I'm going to do the table last because I'm going to demonstrate to you later on that working with tables in the design view is not very friendly for this, for Visual Studio. It's something that I think maybe they still have some yet to work on, or maybe there's some reason for it. But working with tables, I think should be the last thing you do. So for now, what we're going to do is we're going to put everything into panels, right? So with panels, it allows us to group things together, and so we can unhide and hide groups of things all at once. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the toolbar, and we're going to look for a panel. It's going to drag the panel in. So I'm going to drag it between the div tags, and I'll leave it as its default name, panel 1. I'm going to use the generic names for the panels for this exercise here. Now, with a panel, what you do is you put your stuff between the opening and closing tag. So you put your labels, your text boxes, your buttons, you put it all between the opening and closing panel, and that way you can say panel1.visible equals false. It hides everything all together. All right? So that's what's convenient about it. So what we're going to do is we'll start off with name. So I'm going to say name here. I'm not going to bother with labels for my text, my static text. So I'm going to say name. And I'm going to add a text box next to name. So for now, I'm just going to use the coding view and just drag stuff directly onto it. So let's get a text box going here. I'm just going to put it next to name right there. I'm going to call this TB name. So ID will be TB name. Okay. And what I'll do is I'll add a button. So I'm going to have my submit button going right away because I want to get right into demonstrating that required field validator. So I'm going to put the button down here. I'm going to call it BTN submit. The text will be next. All right. And I'll add my event handler. So I'm going to switch to design view quickly and just double click on it, add my event handler, just so it's there. All right, so we got my BTN submit click button here. All right, switching back to source. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a couple of break tags just above the button. All right, just right there. Now with name, I'm going to add my first validator. So my first required field validator. So I'm going to go over to toolbox. And I'm going to minimize my standard widgets here. I'm going to minimize my data widgets as well. And I'm going to pull out, so under validation here, we have a number of different validators that we can work with here. And I'm going to pull out required field validator. I'm going to drag it. Placing it doesn't really matter. I'm going to, just for organization's sake, I'm going to put it right below my text box. And I'll just add, I'll cut up this line so it's easier to read for us on the screen here. And I'll explain what these do. All right. Before we switch to design view to see what they actually look like, let's look at the ID. So first off, I'm going to change the ID to be, because it's required, I'm going to use REQ and name. Now, the second thing, so after ID, I'm going to switch to error message. So the error message is the actual message you want the user to see. So by default, I'll put that cheesy required field validator message for us. So I'm going to switch that over to be name required. All right, let's see what it looks like in design view. So we have name required. Looks like plain simple text. So what I can do is I can go over to properties over here and finish off the rest. Now we did ID, we did error message. Let's look at our list here. So control to validate is the most important setting you have to set for this. So control to validate should give you a drop down of all the controls it could possibly validate with. So control to validate, I'm going to choose TB name. So it should add, yep, somewhere here. There we go. Control to validate. It added TB name. So it linked the text box name to my required field validator. Now at this point, I might dress it up a little bit. Let's add some color so it really stands out. So I'm going to scroll down to font bold. Let's make it bold. So font bold, we'll set to true. Font italic, let's set to true. So bold. And then for color, well, it says for color is red. So this will leave it as red. Now if I switch, now it's saying for color is CC0000, which is really red in hex. There. So we have our entire required field validator. Now, this should be enough for us just to run it, and let's see if it actually works. So I'm going to right-click on default.aspx. We'll say View in Browser. Let's see what happens. This is what we should see. Now, your name, I'll hit tab away. Nothing happened. If I hit next, I get an error message. All right, so this error, what it's basically saying is that it's trying to link in some JavaScript and jQuery into our error messages for our validation. We're just going to do things purely on the server side, so we actually have to tell the system that, hey, we don't really want any jQuery or JavaScript to be parsed at this point, because it's looking for jQuery, it's looking for libraries. So to fix this, we have to actually go into web config. And according to the forums on Stack Overflow, we add this one setting, and this will fix everything. So we're going to switch over to web config. So you'll find that with web config, there are settings we can set, and this will allow us to be able to control different things from login to, in this case, validation, so a lot of things. So we're going to create a new category here called app settings. Right? It creates a closing app settings. Within app settings, we're going to add one new item. So we're going to say add key equals. This key is going to be a long key. So it's going to say validation settings. You gotta note the spelling here. And then we're gonna add this other setting. You gotta be very careful of the spelling here. So validation settings : unobtrusive validation mode. And then we're gonna set the setting for that, value equals none. This is basically saying we don't want to have any JavaScript, like jQuery, any sort of client-side scripting to link in with our validation. I have one extra double quote. There we go. Everything looks clean now. Right? So what you want to do is you want to save that before switching back to the form to try again. All right. So switching back to default.aspx, let's try this again. So let's run default.aspx again. So we'll say view in browser. And this time, if I hit next, it shows name required. Right? So you should have name required pop up and not that error message this time. So what we're going to do now is we got name. Name is up and running, we got a required field. The next thing we wanted to add was address. So we're going to add the address. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste the first two things. So I have here a text box and a required field validator. I'm just going to copy those and paste it right below. I'm just going to put like a break tag between a couple of them. Right? And for the second one, it's going to be address. And so I'm going to put address in text there. I'm just going to change the ID for the text box to be TB address. And let's look at the required field validator. It has a lot of the features I care about. ID I'm going to change to REQ address. Error message will be address required. Control to validate TB address. Right? So basically all the settings from TB name. I just changed the ID. I changed the control to validate, and I changed the error message so that they link together. All right, so let's see this in action. Like we shouldn't see any issues here. Just viewing in browser, we should see address this time complain. So after hitting the next button, you should see name acquired and address required. So you should see two validators now. Let's do it for two more. So we're going to do it for email and phone. So I have these two copied again. I'm just going to paste it below. So I'm going to add a couple of break tags. I'm going to say email and then paste. And so paste it. Notice that it's pasting the ID. Whenever I'm copying and pasting a control, it just renames it to textbox1 or its default name. So this time it's going to be TB email. And required field validator will just be REQ email. And we'll put error message as email required. And we'll say control to validate, which is again the most important thing, to be TB email. Alright, so we have email. Quickly look at the design view instead of running it again. You see email required is there. Last one we'll add is phone. So a couple of break tags. We'll say phone. And so the ID for phone will be TB phone. And the ID for the validator will be REQ phone. We'll say phone required. Control to validate TB phone. And if we look, design view, we see everything there. And just to run it again, alright, we have here name required, address required, email required, and phone required. Alright, so now that we have name, address, email, and phone all validated, right? And just to verify, we'll just type in like Jim Kirk. We'll say he lives at 123 Enterprise Lane. As As I tab away, they go away. Email will be jim@kirk.com. Phone number will be 222-333-4444. And they all go away. I hit next. Nothing happens, of course. Now let's put in a messed up email. Hit tab. Still no error. Let's put in ASDF for phone number. Still no error. That's because we have to check for those errors separately. So we've got our validation for blank entry, but we need to have a validation for invalid entry. And in this case, we don't name and address. We really only care about blank, but for email, we want to have a proper email, and for phone, we want to have a proper phone number. So let's go ahead and add those in. So looking at email, I'm going to start with email. I'm going to switch to design mode for this, so it's better visible. I want to put another error message next to email for an invalid email. So if I go back to my toolbox, and I'm going to minimize my standard widgets, minimize my data widgets. Under validation, we have regular expression validator. Right? So regular expression validator sort of checks for style of input, right, through regular expressions. Now, if you're not comfortable with regular expressions, that's okay, because it has standard regular expressions for helping us with email and phone number at the very least, as well as zip codes and postal codes and so on. So I'm going to take regular expression, I'm going to drag it over. I'm actually going to place it next to email first. And I'm going to use the properties window on the side here to do all my work right now, because it's a lot easier to work with. So I'll start at the top. I'm going to change the ID to be reg email. Right? Just my name there, my ID for the control. Now, control to validate again the most important thing we have to set. Control to validate always is the most important thing to set. So we're going to change that to be TB email. So TB email will be my control to validate. Now, we've got control to validate set for TB email. Let's look at what else. Font. So for color, I'm going to switch it. I'm not going to use red for the for color. I'm going to use purple, or at least a purplish color, so it stands out a bit. Error message. Switch error message to be invalid email. And with font, we'll switch bold and italic to be true, just to really stand out. And so we have invalid email. But what's missing now is, how do we tell it that we want an invalid email? So we linked it with control to validate already. We've configured the message to the invalid email. We've even done some font work. Now, the last thing we have to set, and this is the second most important thing, is what regular expression am I going to use? I want to tell it to check for emails. Right now it doesn't know. So I have to scroll down more, and there is a field called validation expression is the one we're going to click on. You notice there's 3 dots, so a little dot, dot, dot there. We click on the dot, dot, dot. A new window pops up, and now you can choose your regular expression. So look at the list here: French phone number, German phone number and postal code, email address. There's also email URL, internet URL, Japanese phone number, and I'll just scroll down to the rest, because there's actually US phone number and US zip code. So we're going to use US phone number afterwards for phone number after. So I'm going to choose internet email address. And the validation expression pops up for me automatically, so you don't have to memorize this. So that's a nice thing about it. Just hit OK. Now let's do it one more time for phone before we test this out. So under phone, so let's drag over, let's do it one more time. Under toolbox, I'm going to drag another regular expression. And I'll start from the top again. So this will be called, its ID will be reg phone. And control to validate will be TB phone. And then scrolling down, error message will be invalid phone. And then font will be true for bold, true for italic. And the color I can find it. There it's 4 color. Will be that light purple again. And finally, validation expression. So this time I'm going to use US phone number. It's like the third last one. And hit OK. Now we can give it a shot. Let's see what happens. So let's run this here. And I'm going to hit next. So it just shows me the required. It doesn't show me the email and invalid phone. So let's start entering stuff. Jim Kirk. 123 Enterprise Lane. Now invalid email. Let's say Jim. And hit tab. So now it says invalid email. Let's enter a bad phone number. ASDF. Shows invalid phone. Now, before we close off the discussion on validation, you notice the location of invalid email and invalid phone. It's kind of awkward. There's a blank gap between the error message and the text box. And what's happening is that our our required field validator is actually, its error message is actually there, but it's whited out because it's valid, like we have input there. But we want to be able to place that purple text over top of that as needed, so it looks proper. So there's one last thing we can do. So one last thing we can do. Now we have to click on, well, I'll start with invalid phone. And under the display property, instead of static, which basically pastes it onto the screen exactly where it is, we're going to switch that to dynamic. But we have to do it to the one next to it too. So phone required, its display should be dynamic as well. Between the both being dynamic, it'll now allow for either of these to appear in this slot, right? Because it's dynamically placing it. We'll do the same for email. Set display to dynamic. And set email required to dynamic. And now you can run it, and you should see everything proper. All right, so let's hit next again. So Jim Kirk, 123 Enterprise Lane. Jim, hit tab. Invalid email is in the correct place. ASDF for phone number. Invalid phone is in the correct place. So now we can correct everything and finish off our entry. Our phone number be 222-333-4444, and it all goes away. All right, so now the next step is now that we've got our validators up and running, let's move on to a new panel. But before that, I want to add a new field to these text boxes here, these inputs here. I want to add a birthday field just above the next button. So what I'll do is, on a new line, I'm going to say birthday. And I'm going to add a text box, but no validator for this text box. So I'm going to put a text box right next to birthday. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to change enabled to false because I don't want anybody to enter anything into it. And I'm going to change the ID for text box 1 for this new text box from text box 1 to TB birthday. All right. So I'm going to have two things here. So I'm going to change the ID and I'm going to change the enabled to false. So what it'll look like is this. So birthday will be grayed out. We can't enter anything in. I don't want to be able to enter anything in. There is a read-only option, but it still looks like a text box. Another option is to maybe use a label instead, right? Instead of a text box. So we could do that too. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually add a calendar object that will actually populate this text box with the proper date and time that's selected from the calendar. So we're going to put that into a new panel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to code. So source mode. And looking back at the code here, we have birthday, we have our submit button, we have our closing panel. So I knew I said I would turn this into a table. I'm not going to do it just yet today. Probably leave it for the next class. But I'm going to add a new panel right below it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag a panel. So we have here the closing ASP panel. We have here a new ASP panel that we're bringing in. Put some space between it. And so we have here, I'm going to leave it as its default name, panel 2. The only thing I'm going to do is change its visibility. So look at the properties here. I'm going to look for visible. Visible will be false. Right? Visible will be false. I don't want to see this panel. But I still want to be able to add stuff to it. So if I switch back to design, I still see the panel. I'm still going to put a couple of things. I'm going to put a calendar in, and I'm going to put a button in. So under Toolbox, let's look for a calendar. Drag a calendar into this panel. And it has to be inside the panel. So here it auto-generated a nice little calendar for me. So in ASP.NET, we have the calendar control. It saves a lot of headache compared to HTML. We have to, or maybe you have to go to like a jQuery or something to generate our own calendar. But this comes in the box, right, out of the box, so we can actually work with it. The nice thing about this calendar is I can auto-format it, so I can click on auto-format. I can change the style. There's more styles I could probably go with based on, a design, but these are the standard ones that come with it. So I can go with simple, professional, professional 2. Some of these should look familiar. Maybe you've seen them on other websites, right? I'll go with professional 1. I like that the best. It's the most classy to me. So I'll hit OK. And then what I want to do is below this calendar, so I'm going to hit enter, a little space there. I'm going to add a button. So I'm going to add a button here. All right. So I have my button, I have my calendar. Now what I want to do is I want to set up an event handler such that if I click anywhere on the button, like any new date, it'll populate my birthday text box above. That's the idea. So if I want to create an event handler that'll change, similar to the drop down we did in the previous exercise, or the checkbox that we unchecked it, or we checked it to enable a button, we'll do the same thing by just double clicking on the calendar. Double clicking on the calendar creates an event handler called selection changed. And we use our default name calendar 1, so I haven't changed it, so keep calendar 1 there. And we'll come back to this in a moment. Now, we have another button there. So let's just modify the properties for the button while we're here. So the text for this button, I'm just going to call it next, or the text will be next. And the ID will be btn submit 2. So btn submit 2, and next is the text. And I'll add my event handler since I'm at it. So double clicking on next, this new one, will give me btn submit 2 click. So I have here 3 event handlers: btn submit click, calendar 1 selection change, and btn submit to click. And now my default, this new panel, this shouldn't be visible. So let's just do a run. Make sure that the calendar and the new button don't appear because we set the panel to be visible equals false. So let's make sure, and yep, it is not visible, right? So now what I want to do is, after entering all my information, I want to be able to unhide that panel, assuming all my validation has been correct. So let's do that. So with my next button up here, all I want to do in btn submit click is unhide that panel. So panel2 dot visible equals true. Try again. So now we have your name. So I'll just enter proper information. So Jim Kirk, 123 Enterprise Lane, jim@kirk.com, and 222-333-4444. Hit next, and we see our panel is there. All right, so now the last thing we're going to do is, looking at the calendar, we create an event handler so that anytime something changed, we want to update the birthday text box. So to do that, let's go back to that event handler, calendar 1 selection changed. Now, with the calendar, if we ever want to retrieve the date or time that has been entered or selected or manipulated, then we have to use an object called datetime. So I'll type that here, datetime. Right? That class is the standard class. It's a very powerful class that allows us to manipulate date and time. Right? And so there's a lot to it. So I invite you to check out the documents on Microsoft.com related to this object so you can see what it can really do. Now, for us, what we want to do is we want to retrieve the currently selected date when clicked on the calendar. So I'm going to say date time, I'll call it DT, equals, and our calendar is called calendar 1, so I'll just say calendar 1 dot selected date. There's a few selected, but we'll take selected date. All right. Now I want to take that date and I want to flush it into the text box. So I want to say tb birthday dot text is equal to dt dot toString. So before I finish that, I just want to take it, I want to convert the current date selected to a string. But there's a couple other options. There's toShort date string and there's toShort time string. So our calendar is just selecting dates, so we don't even worry about the time. But short date might be a really quick shortcut to getting the actual date. But I'm going to go custom on this. I'm going to actually format the date and time the way I want to. So I'm going to choose toString. And inside toString, I have to specify how I want the date and time to be formatted. So I have to provide the formatting. So I'm going to provide the formatting now, and then we will look at Microsoft's documentation to see what these letters mean. So inside double quotes, I'm going to say MMMM, right? And then I'm going to say D, comma, YYYY. And I'll explain what these mean soon. But suffice to say, I'm taking the date time, I'm converting it to a string based on this format. So you can see month, day, and year, essentially. We'll talk about why I'm using these capitals and lower cases, why I'm using 4 M's instead of 1. All right, we'll talk about that in a sec. What we can do is we can run this now. So view in browser. All right, so I'll just enter my information in again. hit next, and I'll choose, now I'm going to choose some dates. So July 13th, it appears here, July 13th, 2017. Choose another date, July 7th, 2017. So you can see in real time, it's updating the selected date. Now, based on the input that I provided. So let's look at what those letters mean. So if I search for ASP.NET date time, this is the first Microsoft doc hit that comes up. And I have to scroll down. It's called Custom Date and Time Format Strings. And it'll tell me all about the different, it gives me an example of how to use it in C# and at the console. But if I look at the format specifiers are here. So D, for example, the D on its own meant that I want day of the month from 1 to 31. But I could have done a DD for 1 to 31, but have a leading 0. So 01, 02, 03 if I wanted to. And then triple D is actually abbreviated day of the week. 4 Ds is full day of the week, right? So Fs relate to the time. I'm not going to get into that. We have capital Fs again for the time part. And period of an era. Interesting. Now we have here H for hour. So 12-hour clock. HH for 12-hour clock with the leading 0. We have capital H for 24-hour clock. Letter K for time zone. M for minutes. Now capital M is for month. So just one M is month 1 to 12, so numbered. MM is 0, 1, and so on. 3 M's is the abbreviated name of the month. And so that's why I went with 4 M's, because I wanted the full name of the month. Right? I wanted the full name. And then we have here seconds for S. We have here now Y's for the years. So I could have just done the 2-digit year, so single Y, or 2 Y's for with leading 0. 3 Y's is minimum 3-digit year. Now I did the 4Y because I wanted the 4-digit number year. But hey, Microsoft thought long, and they used a 5-digit year. So hey, if we hit the year 10,000 or 11,000, and this website will still work properly. So it's good to know that Microsoft's thinking big here. Furthermore, there's hours and so on. But yeah, essentially, this website's very useful for getting that proper date format specifier that you're looking for, that you want to print to the screen. So at this point, we're going to pause this here. We'll continue this next class where we're going to continue on with the remaining panels. And we're going to get into using a table, and we're going to get into using query strings, cookies, and sessions.